go now, and we're going to start letting. I love that. All right. So I'd like to introduce Cindy King. Cindy King was born in Cleveland, Ohio, and grew up swimming in the shadows of the hyperboreal coaling towns on the shores of Lake Erie. She teaches down in Dixie State University, where she's also the faculty advisor of the Southern Quill. She has been awarded a Tennessee Williams Scholarship to attend the Sewanee Raiders Conference workshop, and her poems are chosen for the Betty Gabehart Prize by the University of Kentucky. She has published basically everywhere, and she has 2 books, Zoonotic and Easy Street. So she will be our host tonight, and thank you, Cindy.
Hey everybody, thank you so much, Paisley, for that wonderful introduction, and thank you everyone for coming tonight. I am so glad to be here this year and very disappointed that we didn't get to meet last year, but I'm so glad we're here, even if it's virtual. And this event, I just love it. It makes us feel so connected as poets and people. So again, thank you. We're in for a really big treat tonight. We've got Michael and Natasha, so it's just going to be fabulous. Michael Lavers, wonderful author of After Earth, published by the University of Tampa Press. His poems have appeared in Plowshares, Agni, the Hudson Review, Best New Poets 2015, Tri-Quarterly, the Georgia Review, and a whole bunch of other places. He's been awarded the Chad Walsh Poetry Prize, the University of Canberra Vice Chancellor's International Poetry Prize, the Bridport Poetry Prize, and together with his wife, the artist and the writer, Claire Akebrand, and their 2 children. They live in Provo, Utah, and he teaches at Brigham Young University. And I hope that he can come down to DSU and give a reading for us someday. So go ahead and take it away, Michael. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here and to participate in this poetry festival and to celebrate so much great poetry that's happening here in our state. I'm just going to talk and assume you can hear me. And if you can't, someone will jump in and say they can't hear you. It's really exciting to be here. I want to thank Paisley for inviting me to read and for all the work that she and everyone else has done to put this together. And thank you, Cindy, for that very kind introduction. And it's a real pleasure to read with Natasha, and I'm really excited to hear her poems. I really enjoy poetry readings, but I'm always uncertain about what to say about my own poems. The more I read poetry and read about it and try to write it, I feel like the less I understand it. It seems like a wonderfully mysterious thing to me. I have no working definition of what a poem is or should do or where it comes from. And I collect favorite sayings about it, and my favorite sayings, quotes about poetry, usually express similar ambivalence or uncertainty. A recent new find for me is this quip by Goethe that I found in this book by Johann Ackermann called Conversations with Goethe. He's describing this scene in which all these literary types eating dinner together. And this is what Ackermann writes. People began to discuss the new younger poets, and it was observed that none of them could write good prose. That fact is very simple to explain, said Goethe. To write prose, one must have something to say. But he who has nothing to say can still make verses and rhymes, in which one word suggests the next, until at last something appears, which is in fact nothing, but which at least looks like something. Obviously, he's describing a certain type of poetry, maybe, but I actually really like this as a definition of all poetry, in which one word really does indeed suggest the next, and which indeed does have the appearance of something, but of what exactly it's hard to say. I like that poetry relieves me of the burden of having to understand things or of needing to have things to say. The closest I can get, there's another one here by the poet Christopher Fry that I really like. He wrote, "Poetry is the language in which we explore our own amazement." I really like this word amazement because it too suggests that what's happening in poetry isn't really the same thing as knowledge, and it's quite difficult to describe. It's more like an attitude of surprise or wonder or reverence or awe or something. So I guess I'll say that most of what you're about to hear are attempts at recording this kind of attitude, stunned and confused, amazement, which is leads me to my first poem here, which is called "The Angel in Charge of Creating Earth Addresses His Cohort." Who cares if more important worlds have been assigned to those more skillful, who make crusts that never crack, or plates too fixed to creep or jostle or explode? Ours are the splendors of the makeshift, of the good enough, of cold May wind, wailing and barbed and riven, coastlines ragged as a vulture's wing, of maggots and voles, a vast legion of catalysts and scavengers the top worlds are deprived of, worlds where the joins are tight, with skies unyieldingly cloudless, only blue. Believe your errors, what they lead you to. Those patches we forgot to water, call them deserts, hide there all our misbegotten dregs, the scorpions and saltbush beds, blind rats, weird toads. What's perfect is by definition free of difference, but uncountable and great are the variations of failure. Take this ostrich, my self-portrait, botched and brainless, but still capturing my flouncy abandon, my leathery grace. Take humans, no two cracked the same, some warped or knotted, bent of back, some dragging weak-seamed hearts toward stagnation. Even the lava spreads its glaze in ways that no trained hand could replicate. A slow, terrible fluency that bleeds and burps and teaches those who live nearby to love what ends, to build what walls they must, to graft their growing hopes to gravity and move more upright through the tilted world. Don't envy them, those better makers. Let them envy you, not doomed to mastery, still stunned by your mistakes, the broken pomp of cow, the fraying homespun jellyfish, the accidents of beauty which, once realized, can never be forgotten or undone. This next poem is called "The Burden of Humans." The grass just has to wave. The birds just have to sing. The grapes don't wonder what light is. The light just lights them, and the grapes grape back. The golden oaks just shed their summer dresses on the lawn, but you have to read Spinoza in the garden while the light is good. You have to keep your focus as the motorcycles scream out of the purple hills. You have to sweat and laugh and weatherproof the bedroom windows and remember names and dates, the town your parents met in, Milk River or Swan Hills, and when they died. You have to sweep the kitchen floor and then define the good, the true, the beautiful, or try because azaleas can't see themselves. The squirrels are busy and the ferns have closed. The frost tattoos its sermon on the rose, but in a language only you can read. You have to know that all things pass and perish, but that what you've said is finite, but continue as if grand exceptions might be made, raking the leaves, stacking the wood, hoping the child falls asleep against your chest, hoping the blizzard swerves, knowing the wreckage of the present will be gathered, but not soon, and not by you, because you're in it, there somewhere, under the sheet of snow. I bounce around a lot between free verse and blank verse and pretty tight formal verse. I can't quite say why, other than the fact that I seem to follow Emerson's injunction of obeying my whims and following them to whatever poem they lead me to. So here is a sonnet. It's called Coda. From the garden rose the sound of bees that lurched and wobbled through the peonies. We ate eggs and toast with milk that warmed in minutes in the sun, while fat drones swarmed and looped like bullets misfired from the fields. It was the sound the mind makes when it yields to glutted blood. I didn't understand, until one smelled the syrup on your hand and in a gold-encrusted drunken strut smeared pollen from its mandibles and gut along your wrist. That morning you had tied your hair, and as you rose and ran inside, it gently bounced and loosed and then unfurled. If the next is better, I'll still miss this world. These next two poems are pretty newish for me, a few months old only, which is kind of frighteningly new. Probably the steam will kind of cool off of them and I won't be so enthusiastic about them in a few more months, but for now, I like them well enough to read. This is called Sun, Birds, and Leaves. Sun, birds, and leaves outside my window. Sun and birds and leaves and a valley and a lake, and beyond that, hills. The sun that is on me, the birds that are birds, small wings and frail backs, sparrows bobbing in a cold wind on the wheat stalks near the fence, perched sideways, hanging on, some nearly upside down, tearing off seeds. Yes, I watched my mother die. She moaned until she had no voice to moan, but was still in pain, and I have not forgotten. The seizure in the bathtub, getting in with her and holding her up so she did not drown. Who's to say things should be different? It is spring, and there are birds, and sun and leaves, and my happiness in this moment knows death. It has agreed to the moaning. It seeks neither recompense nor relief. Heaven is here, and I have not forgotten. I smile because I want to, knowing. I stare and stare. I ask nothing to change. In this next poem, I allude to a painting that we have hanging in our house. It's a painting by Henri Rousseau, the French poet, painter. It's a painting called The Dream, and it's kind of jungly and green and lush. This poem is called The Inextinguishable, and it's directed to, I'm addressing my children, my son and my daughter. The Inextinguishable. Son, daughter, rejoice. They were wrong who said all things will be taken, that nothing will last. They were wrong. There is no hour of departure. Every atom will endure. Dust longed to become you. The stars know your names. Blue evening light, a window, melon rinds gathering flies. Rousseau's The Dream. Eons waited for this. Small, bright, true things saved from the dark. They were wrong. They were wrong. I will see my parents again. What was will be. What is will not change. This table, these dishes, those flies. Rejoice. Give thanks. Weep. We go sorrowless onward forever. My son recently learned to ride a bike. This is another poem in rhyme that I wrote about that, and it's called Small Boy Riding a Bike. All day he scraped himself against the edge of skill, of hard perfection, barely sensed, far off, until some dark chain finds its gear, and thus old skills combine into an inner calculus of weight and line, of style and turn, of torque and of touch and torque. Momentum grows. He's got it now. He's spinning work out of repose, leaning on wind, daring to drift, chin elevated, sure and not that this new lift is counterweighted by some ballast in his brain. A vast technique of poise and pitch that must remain softly oblique, unconscious of its own perfection. Earth could slip, but in the casual correction of his grip be fixed. He is the hub, the gate from which the spokes of wayward stars now radiate. Now he can coax by pumping hard, whatever sweat or cadence might repair the planet's tilt, might set the balance right. All night that sweet, ghostly resistance burns his shins. His mind, now prodigal with distance, spins and spins. This is the last poem I'll read. It's a poem about London, which a place I've never been to, so all of these details are probably at a time that, of course, I could never go there in. So all of these details are probably totally wrong and had to be imagined, if not totally fabricated. It's called Last Night's Snow. My lord, wake up. There's snow. It fell all night. Snow on the inns and taverns, hovels, lanes, on courtyards, alehouses, guild halls, gates. Look at the baker's son dropping his loaves on ice. The harlots huddled on Hog Lane, Moorgate and Cripplegate covered in snow, the palace lost inside the commonness of snow, all London hushed like under lambskin. Snow on posts and pillories and stocks, on the unburied dead, on ancient graves. Wake up, my lord. Here's cheese, here's ale, and your long pants and your boots unpolished as you like. Look how the sky seems lighter, like a ship back from the land of spice, unburdened of its load. The whole world packed in salt, the beef stalls and the breweries, the herring smells and onion smells, the smells of ague, pox, and plague smothered in snow, which, like yourself these days, is not itself, but lays there, still, and takes its form from all it touches, soldiers, courtiers, vagrants, strays. Why not get up and start something? Some monologue, some scene. Let me be in it, as a servant. And your boy, what was his name? You know the plague took mine away. Those mocks and gibes that made his mother roar, all gone, melting like snow into eternity. But sir, to live is to endure such things, to let things be. Why not give yours some speech, some shape? Make him a prince. Say that we shall not die, but shall be changed, that man's a wondrous animal, a thinking dust, a radiant thing. My lord, here's ink, here's paper. Look, sir, Master Shakespeare, Will, do you not see? It is for you all this is happening. St. Paul's and Bishopgate covered in ice, the whole smashed glass of cloud and sky. The highwaymen and hangmen, mongers, hawkers, nobles, waifs, the shivering laundresses and limping smiths, the carts and carriages on endless show. For you all their entrances and exits, this absurd bright air and all it touches, all these people, all this snow. Thank you.
Oh, that was just wonderful. Thank you, Michael, so much. I hope you get to London someday and that your grapes keep graping. I'm sure all of you, if you know Natasha, you know what a wonderful person and poet she is. When I first moved here in 2016, a mutual poet friend put me in touch with Natasha. And since that time, she's just been really so welcoming and warm and wonderful. And she's come down to DSU to give a reading. And it was one of the highlights of my time here in Utah. So thank you so much, Natasha. Natasha Sajé, she's the author of 3 books of poems, including Red, Under the Skin from the University of Pittsburgh Press, Bend from Tupelo Press, and Vivarium, also from Tupelo Press. Among her many, many awards she's received for her work, the Agnes Lynch Starrett Prize, the Towson State Prize in Literature and the Utah Book Award. She's also the author of a book of poetry criticism, Windows and Doors, A Poet Reads Literary Theory, from the University of Michigan Press, and a book of creative nonfiction called Terroir, Love Out of Place. Her many other honors include the Bannister Writer-in-Residence at Sweetbriar College, the Robert Winter Award from the Poetry Society of America, and the Campbell Corner Poetry Prize. And she also received a Fulbright scholarship to Slovenia. She's got a chapbook of poems coming out called Special Delivery, and that will be here. It's from Diode Editions, and that'll be here this summer. She teaches at Westminster College in Salt Lake City, where she directs the Weeks Poetry Series, and she is the Vermont College of Fine Arts MFA writing program. She teaches in that program. So without further ado, join me in welcoming Natasha Sajé.
Hello. Thank you, Paisley, Cindy. Let me just get my view. Here. Again, thank you, Paisley, Cindy, Alan, and Michael. Thank you for those wonderful poems. 17th century, some of them, and yet 21st century also. Wonderful amalgam and a wonderful reading. I'm going to start by reading a piece of my memoir and essays, Terroir, and then read some poems from Vivarium and end with a couple new poems. And I hope that my prose has something to say, but I'll let you decide. So the piece that I'm going to read is from a chapter titled Line Upon Line. And it's about religion, love, and ways of knowing. At 18, home from college for Christmas, I paid for a session with a psychic who read palms. Born with myriad fine and deep lines on my palms and foot soles, a genetic condition inherited from my mother, I wondered what a palm reader would say about them. Palmistry was one of the ways I sought to understand who I was or could be. At 15, I bought a computer-generated chart informing me that in addition to a Gemini sun, I had the moon in Cancer, Sagittarius rising, Venus in Taurus, and Mercury in Gemini. I consulted these certainties when I felt confused, which was often. Sagittarius rising meant, for example, that I experience life as a quest for meaning and that I need an outlet for my energies. And the generality of the wisdom nuggets didn't discourage me. On a mission to understand myself and others, I was as fervid as a badger digging for a vole and as stealthy, for my parents, I thought, didn't have a clue about the hobbies to which I devoted so many hours. I also started analyzing handwriting. With graphology books spread out in front of me, I would create a portrait of the person from their script, looking at spacing, shape, slant, and letter formation. A blank page allows the hand, ambassador for the body, to express feelings about the past, the future, about giving and taking, about saying I. I even consciously altered my own handwriting to align with how I wanted to be, eliminating the affected cap on the lowercase a and using a single stroke capital I. I didn't know then that graphology is a pseudoscience, a way of knowing that cannot be proven. The 40-minute appointment with the psychic palm reader, a suburban housewife, took place in the airy kitchen of her colonial in Bergen County, New Jersey. She had come recommended by a friend with whom I shared not only a quest for self-knowledge, but a sense of unfulfillment. We yearned for a mademoiselle whirl of parties with boys professing endless love, at the same time that we nurtured arcane passions and refused to smooth the edges of our intellects in order to attract boys. I was a slate on which crisscrossed two very different kinds of writing. The 70s dominant culture's block type and the often illegible cursive of my own oddities. I thought I could find out everything I needed to know. While I had secretly chosen the University of Virginia in part because of the ratio of men to women, 8-1, favored my getting dates with men, after a fraternity party the first week of college, boys in docksiders and chinos drinking Kool-Aid laced with grain alcohol dropped off my list of interests. At the same time, in a first-year seminar called Sense and Nonsense and the Game of Reading, the brilliant and wacky professor sat cross-legged like a Buddha on the coffee table in the dorm's basement lounge, reciting Wallace Stevens' poem, The Idea of Order at Key West, or William Blake's The Garden of Love. Blake's poem describes a locked chapel built on the green and ends, priests in black gowns were walking their rounds and binding with briars my joys and desires. It was a poem I too memorized. Blake's unconventional, for his era, ideas included sexual and racial equality, and his mysticism encouraged me to delve deeper into realms beyond here and now. Perhaps many teenagers are obsessed with divination at this time in their lives, when anything seems possible, yet little can be attained. The word divination has as its root divus, godlike, because gods know what humans don't. In Greek mythology, 3 fates are responsible for determining someone's thread of life. Clotho spins it, Achesis draws it out, and Atropos cuts it. In the Bible, Job 14 reads, "A person's days are determined. You have decreed the number of his months and set limits he cannot exceed. So look away from him and let him alone, till he has put in his time like a hired laborer." This suggests that God determines a person's lifespan, but not her fate. The psychic was careful to preface her remarks with something like, "Nothing I tell you cannot be altered by your own actions." I remember little of what she said, except for one thing. You will find your soulmate in middle age. I must have looked horrified about the wait, because she quickly added, "Oh, don't worry, you will love and be loved. It's just that this relationship will be different." Given the divorce rate in the US, her prediction could have just been a good bet. So I'll stop there and read some poems. So this one is titled Happy and Sad. Happy and sad come different ways through the brain. In one, a feather is lofted on warm currents. In the other, lead talons drag you around a volcano's rim. One's a beach resort with sparkling pools and attentive staff. The other's a town in the interior, hordes scratching dirt with rakes. That one's a deck of marked cars. The other a blank book of creamy pages. Back and forth between windows, fort, da. The fear of losing or the freedom of knowing, love remains. 2 spigots, one Chateau d'Yquem, the other piss. The brain a bartender trying to regulate, alternating, or sometimes even simultaneous spurts. You never know what will fill your mouth. The Varium is a book that contains a lot of letters inspired by the alphabet and by etymology and by just reading the dictionary. So my method in making a lot of the poems in that book was to open the dictionary, a hard copy dictionary at random, and make lists of words or meanings or etymologies I didn't know. This one is the letter H, and I discovered that there's something called reduplicatives, and they're very common. They very commonly start with H, and you'll hear them as I start to read them. I never knew what they were what they were called until I heard Christy the Wordsmith from Montana State University on the radio talk about them. So H. And I guess this is a sonnet. Oh, how we hanky-panky harum-scarum in our happy home, dancing hoochie-coochie. Sure, it makes for hugger-mugger, but we give a hoot for happenstance. The yard is full of hound and hares, the door adorned with harlequins, in the closets, hand-me-downs. If Hammurabi and his queen come by, we won't be hoity-toity, we'll offer haggis or humble pie. Our bed floats on hocus pocus, our corpore holy habeas, and the kitchen hums a hymn, hail to higgledy-piggledy. If the world can't call our hurly-burly hunky-dory, let it harakiri if it dares. So this is another letter, and it has a diacritical mark that doesn't exist in English. It's like a little V over an S. But it exists in the letter, the sound exists in Slovenian, which is the country of my father and where I spent a semester as a Fulbright scholar. So this poem is trying to capture sort of the essence of Slovenia through that letter sound, which is sh. And my name in Slovenian wouldn't have an H, it would have the S with this little diacritical mark over it. At the room of a sleeping child, a finger to the threshold, teeth drawn together, hissing softened by lips, echoed in the cave. Little roof, stresica. Difference between a chocolatier, crush, and limestone, kras. White rocks struck by moon, as in sugar, which can be made from beets, cane, corn, maple, fruit, and milk. Its sweetness rhymes with bees. We say one thing is not another thing, and in this language, every letter is pronounced. Cup gathering a drop of sound, dusty taste of the water, filmed skin after walking in the river, sound the residue of letters. I'd like a letter that splinters language from its parents to build a house of sticks overlooking the sea, letting waves instruct me. Air rushing through my teeth could have passed through the tailpipe of a bus. I want happiness without a hole in it, the heroine says, and the reader knows she's doomed to a life of rifts. Some ideas are so deep you can live in them, deeper than the highest mountains are high, subterranean stalactites forming gypsum flowers like wallpaper. In such darkness, the pale pink Olm, his degenerated eyes covered by skin, can live to 100 years of age. One cousin of the newt or salamander, finding his way via smell. Even Proteus, shepherd of the sea's flocks, cannot protect him from polluted groundwater and his own rarity. He lives only in one place on earth, a place where shh is uttered, and might, if things were different, be a dragon in the ocean's waving fricative, or at least a snake with a crown, none poisonous in this quiet country. So when one of my cousins read that poem, he said to me, well, we do have some poisonous snakes, they just don't kill you. So this next poem, I think you'll hear as a sestina, and I made the title by looking at an anagram generator. And I'll tell you, I mean, when you read the book, this isn't there, I don't believe in notes, but the title that I scrambled was Pollution Curse, which is sort of a freshman comp type of title. And the anagram generator came up with Sluice Pool Turn, which I thought was a much better title. So, what kind of wings would let us soar through glue? Too bad we're stuck on Earth, discovering cells soaked in nitrogen in rain's runoff burning from copper mines, or oil burning seabirds' beaks and wings. We don't demand companies rein in messes even as they screw us over with what they sell. Toxins everywhere. Who on earth knew, Pliny did, that unearthed asbestos plus what we burn, flush, and dump, not to mention cell phones, would shadow us, wings of a bird of prey. We're the mice, glued and trapped by our precipitates. So much for drinking rain or growing carrots in soil full of lead. The nasty stew makes quite a meal. It burns our nostrils and our eyes, swings the scales of health. For sale, natural killer T cells that fight, or not, against the reign of Mercury, the one with wings, in air, in water, and on earth. Heads ache before they roll, burnished by an intravenous goo, administered by cheerful crews to curb abnormal growth of cells, along with radiation burn, surgery, and pills. Healing pain, we hope. Living on a ruined earth, we walk to cure. Winged horses burned into glue, and the earth sold short in our reign, with neither wing nor prayer. I'll read 3 more poems, one more from Vivarium and then 2 new ones. So this poem is called Tingwich, and it's a hapax like a menon, which is a word that I made up. And it was kind of difficult finding a word that did not exist in any language. But so far, the last, when I wrote it about, 8 years ago, this was not a word in English. What you do to me, with me, what I've learned to do with you, a language of bliss, a sublingual, interlingual, bilingual tale that lasts from labial lark through the long light of dawn, a trickle of terroir layered in taste, liquid as thirst, more than touch, less than labor, this lesson in tilt and lather, the tang of a lyre of skin, a lick of liberal tact in tandem, our own Languedoc, turtled in time and tinkered by thrill. It's not lex, not law, but logos, the tabor and talisman of love. And I'll end by reading 2 poems from that chapbook that's coming out this summer, and they're both about Utah or inspired by Utah. I saw that another Utah poet submitted a poem about spiral jetty, an endless topic for Utah poets, I'm sure. So spiral jetty, if you happen not to be from Utah and are listening in, it's Robert Smithson's 1971 earthwork in the Great Salt Lake. Not the magnificent coil I imagined, not worth the discomfort of a long bumpy ride on bad roads, just 3 curls of black basalt piled on gray sand and blue lake, easy to walk on or walk over. An experience I choose not to repeat, despite a possibly different water level, variable light or clouds, and ever so slightly eroded rock. I know the jetty will always look more or less the same, unlike the first time, what? The first time I knew my mother, tired of being in her body, will soon stop eating, will stop looking at me with a longing I'll never again not satisfy. And then the last poem I'll read has a very long title, but it's a very short poem. To the 12 muskrats moving in a line behind my chain link fence at dawn in Salt Lake City on the 1st of September. In the beginning, all the world was water until you, Musquas, drove to the depths to gather a ball of mud, blew on it until it became the whole earth. Together this morning for safety, you prepare for the hard freeze, move quietly in the dark of a new moon. You hear glaciers crack thousands of miles away, carry a map of water in the desert. How did you draw it? How can we read it? Thank you for being here.
Okay, so if anyone has any questions for Michael or Natasha, you can just go ahead and put them in the Q&A. Thank you, Natasha, that was beautiful.
I have a question for Natasha. Am I allowed
Sure.
to ask questions? Natasha, you mentioned you don't like notes in the back of books of poems. I also don't like this, and I've never been able to articulate to myself why. And I'm wondering if you could help me.
Yeah, well, I like them when they're tongue-in-cheek, like Lucy Brock-Broido's first book, A Hunger, had them, and they were so wacky and so not really conveying the information that shed light on the poem, that they were kind of ironic and fun. But I think that when poets, and I guess it's Eliot who started this trend, Eliot or Pound, when they start to try to like clarify their own poems, that, you know, sort of what you were saying, Michael, when you said that prose, or you were quoting Goethe, prose says something and poems, you know, yeah. So that, right. So that impulse of, to try to make it clear and to try to save the reader the trouble of Googling. And I have seen so many mistakes in notes too, that it just makes me chuckle when people spell something wrong, or, you know, here they are explaining or clarifying the poem, and you know. So anyway, that's why I don't like notes. Leave that to the critics, should our work ever be read by anybody other than our contemporaries.
So we have a couple of questions. The first is from Donnie Faber. Where can we find a copy of Small Boy Riding Bike? I loved it.
Oh, I think it is. I should have an answer to this question. Thank you, for whoever that was. Donnie, you said? Thank you. I think Antioch Review, it's just come out or is about to come out. Maybe it will come up if you Google Antioch Review, Small Boy Riding a Bike. I wish I knew more concretely exactly when and where, but yeah, Antioch Review.
Great. And I could check it out with the next question. I can try and Google it. So Cynthia Hallen asks, Natasha, will you please speak about the connections between poetics and linguistics?
Oh. Gosh, I have to think about that. I'm certainly not a linguist, and I don't speak Slovenian. I hope I didn't give you the impression that I'm fluent in Slovenian. But here is a connection. English is not my first language, German is. And I think that a lot of poets grow up curious about language because they were introduced to a second language early on, or they learned early on. I think Jory Graham has a poem called Chestnuts in her very first book, Hybrid of Plants and Ghosts, where it's sort of through a young person's mind. She's thinking about the word chestnut and that it has, it sounds differently in Italian and French and English. And so when you grow up speaking more than one language, you immediately know that things cannot always be said in language, and poetry offers, and this goes back to what Michael was saying in his introduction to his poems, that poetry offers a way, this is Donald Hall, to say the unsayable or the ineffable, or to get at something that language doesn't easily permit us to express.
Okay. Laura Inesco asks, poems show something, right? Or they don't?
Poems show something, or they don't. Well, poems show something. I think poems have different modes, and maybe Michael can help answer too. The dominant mode for me is song, the lyric, but they can also be narrative or descriptive or argumentative. They can have a rhetorical point. I mean, those are sort of the four major modes. What do you think about this, Michael?
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. I mean, that's one of the things that draws me to poetry, because it seems to have a foot in, it can be music, it can be painting. Horace, I think, in the Ars Poetica, is it him who says, ut pictura poesis, or something like, so just as in painting, then so in poetry. So you can write poetry that is more visual, or you can write poetry that is more sonic. You can write poetry that is more cerebral, you know, or less cerebral. It's just, there's no rules. That's one thing that I find so difficult to pin this art form down. It's unpinnable, unpin downable. Yeah.
And then Cynthia Helen has another question. Michael, will you please speak about the relationship between poetry and the love of language?
Oh dear, the love of language. Well, what can I say? Auden, W.H. Auden says that if you don't love reading those long genealogies in the Bible that are just lists of names that go on for pages and pages, you probably don't have what it takes to be a poet. If you don't love the catalog of ships in the Iliad, if you don't love it just for the sonic pleasure, one strange name after the next, then poetry might not be for you. So there's a kind of textural love of language that I would say. But also language does something, I mean, of course I would say this because it's the art form I work in. I do think language does something different than visual art or plastic art. It has ideas in it. You know, a song, I'm now going to ramble. Songs have ideas, paintings have ideas, but not really in the same way that poems, that literature, I'll say that literature does, you know, because what Natasha has so beautifully illustrated, that they come with all these connotations and denotations that are both quite concrete, but also endlessly slippery and changing, you know. That would be my 2 cents.
Great. Natasha, maybe you could comment as well. We don't yet have another question. So your love of language and that relationship between poetry and your love of language.
Yeah, I think for me, poetry is play with language. There are many ways that a poem can start, but if there's not the sense of play, then it might as well be prose. It's a game. It's a formal game. It's a sonic game. It's a puzzle. It can be a puzzle, but there has to be a playfulness to it for me to have it be fun to finish.
Okay, we have another question from Catherine Endermar. Can Michael and Natasha, if the question applies, talk briefly about parenting and poetry?
I'll give that one to you, Michael. I would hands off parenting.
I think it's I remember the poetry critic William Logan. He either said this or he's quoting someone else who says it. Kind of sounds like something Oscar Wilde might say. Children bring out the worst in poets, right? It's like utter doom to become a parent if you're a poet, because your poems probably will instantly get sappy and sentimental. It's like the equivalent of like getting your wallet out and saying, aren't these photos of my kids beautiful? And don't you love them as much as I love them? Nobody wants this. So there's a great risk in assuming that other people will find your kids as charming as you do. And of course they don't. So there are pros and cons. That's the con. The pro for me was that when I had kids, my poems became poetry in general, became more serious. I totally agree with what Natasha's saying about the play. I love that answer. But I wanted that play to also include stuff that mattered, you know, if that makes sense. And play can matter, you know, play is very serious. I wanted to get down on the page things that my children might read one day and find important, if that doesn't sound too grandiose. Yeah, so that would be my answer.
It looks like we have probably time for at least one more question. So we've got the question, Michael, you mentioned that some of your poems you read were only a few months old. What does your revision process look like? How long do you usually spend on a poem? And say that what you said about the steam coming off the poems.
Oh, well, I don't know. I would love to hear what Natasha has to say, but I have this horrible tendency to think that what I just wrote is my best poem because I'm not sick of it yet. It's the newest thing to me, so I think, oh, this is good. This is really good. So a crucial part of my process is to put poems away for as long as I can, months and months. When I reread them, I'm detached and I have distance and I can say, oh, that's not so good. So I always get slightly nervous when I read poems that aren't quite old because I still don't know if I still don't know if I like them. But I'd love to hear Natasha's thoughts about her process.
Well, I tend not to read brand new poems because I think that the listeners have not even heard the old ones. So I might as well read the ones that are sort of tested. There's one venue at the Vermont College of Fine Arts. We have a tradition of faculty always reads brand new poems. And that's kind of fun because we know that they're new and they're often very flawed. And then we'll critique each other. You know, afterwards, someone will say, you shouldn't have said that or whatever. And that's kind of useful. And it's a venue where new poems are treated, they're not recorded, right? So they don't live forever on the internet. But otherwise, yeah, no, I try, you know, I give them years to congeal.